Hello, good morning, and welcome to another installment of Profiles in Tacticalness. So today we'll be discussing everyone's strangely dressed support character here, the Dragon Tamer slash the Beastmaster, whichever one you happen to be playing in whichever game you happen to be playing, because these two classes have gone through a fair number of changes before they were eventually just merged into one class in the PSP remake, and remade and made awesome for one vision, as most things did. Now, let's go ahead and start, as we usually do, with the good old March of the Black Queen version. So, might be thinking, okay, well, this is way back when, this is one of those old ones, and there we go. They were basically exactly what you'd expect from a support way back when. This is a guy that made all beast units stronger in whatever party he was in. He had a whip attack from the back row. By and large, your best bet was to make a team just like this, where you'd have two beast units of whatever variety, and essentially you would stick them in the back row. They would support with using whip attacks, and he made all the beast units a little bit stronger. Now, it should be noted, actually, that's the reason I ended up picking this party, it didn't always end up resulting in a necessarily better party. For example, if you ended up mixing an octopus and a griffin, it was one of the very few cases where the movement type of that particular unit didn't actually scale up. For example, in most cases, if you added a griffin to a party, they automatically became the high-flying type and would automatically be able to just fly around the map with relative impunity. Now, if you ended up adding a griffin to that same group, then you'd have a bit of a different story. Or if you ended up adding an octopus, I apologize, to that same group, you'd have a different story, because suddenly they're not able to, they're changed to the water type instead. Water is inexplicably classed above flying. I'm not sure why, but such is how priorities go. Long story short, if you're going for that sort of build, do not make that team. Just an interesting random discovery for you. Alright, now, moving on. This is a class that, strangely enough, was only a male class. Both of these were only available to male units back in March of the Black Queen, including, if you look on the bottom left, the one that clearly looks like a woman. Now, given how they changed it later on, it's my personal belief that this is due to the fact that they maybe made a mistake somewhere while actually programming the game. Because later on, actually, is as early as Ogre Battle 64, the male units got access to the Beast Tamer, whereas the Dragon Tamer and the Dragon Master became the female class, or their female equivalent, more or less. And the Dragon Master in this case was essentially just that same Beast Master. You gave them a dragon item, I forget the name of it at the moment, but they became the Dragon Tamer at that point, and long story short, they became weirdly feminine all of a sudden. Yeah, they grew out their hair, they started wearing tights, used a sword instead of their usual weapons. It's unclear what exactly happened there, but again, I believe it was due to a programming error. Now, in both of these games, they functioned more or less the same. Both of the Ogre Battle games, I should clarify. Again, serving as a sort of backline support, being able to buff all monster units or anything classed as a monster unit or a beast unit in their party, whereas the Dragon Tamer would end up going and doing the same thing for anything classed as a dragon, regardless of type. Now, things started changing a little bit once we get to Knight of Lodis. This is when they started changing those units out a little bit. So your male variant, the Beast Tamer, basically just got access to a bit better strength between the two of them. He was better at holding his own in the front line, and he provided his bonuses to beast units, whereas the Dragon Tamer got access to some basic levels of missile magic and got access to thrusting swords. Now, given that the male units were using whips, female units were using thrusting swords, both of them had very limited options in terms of their weaponry, so most of the time you're better off just giving them something like a bow. This is a similar story when we look at their counterparts in the original SNES game, in which case, again, you're really just better off having them in the back line if you were using monster units. Typically, it didn't necessarily make sense to use them in a lot of parties. However, if you're going to use them, you might as well use them as a ranged support character, since again, they're basically just providing a small local buff to their respective monster units. They were still a little bit hard to utilize. Now, things start changing and improving a little bit for them once we end up moving up into the next game. So next we have the PSP remake of Let Us Cling Together. Okay, here is the thing, though. They were a class that realized that they were pretty useful as far as being a ranged support character. They got access to bows, and most importantly, they got access to thrown weapons. Herein lies the rub, though. Their best equipment of choice was essentially a light shield, a thrown weapon, and some armor. This would allow them to continuously build up their TP bar, to use the relatively expensive Empower abilities, which would give a roughly 50% bonus to any beast or dragon, depending on what you wanted them to specialize in, within their range. Now, this would essentially boost that particular creature's turn significantly, so it would make them temporarily faster. Additionally, it would make them hit like an absolute truck, and yeah, they were pretty useful if you got them to function properly. Here's the problem, though. Thrown weapons, despite the fact that it was arguably their best weapon, were astoundingly frustrating to use in the PSP remake. Basically, you had to either buy or craft each individual one, and this continued on all the way up till endgame. If you wanted to have them even remotely competitive, you had to go and craft each individual throwing weapon one by one. So, more than likely, you'd probably give them a light bow, just have them do some basic harassment duty. If you wanted to use whips, that was an option, but, whips weren't terribly great. They weren't awful, but they just weren't exactly a terribly good choice. Then you had axes for them as well. Again, a little bit underwhelming. They kind of got the short end of the stick as far as their weapons are concerned. Their main abilities were fairly expensive, and just overall, they didn't really have the durability to go and outlast on the front lines where they needed to be in order to support their monster units. So you might be saying, okay, this all seems a little bit odd. Then why would anybody end up using them? And here is exactly, as per usual, where we end up going ahead and getting to the next version. So now we have the One Vision version. Now, I know I say this every single time, but this, once again, has made them even more awesome than they already were, well, potentially could be. So first and foremost, if we take a look at the different types of things that are available for them here, right here, thrown weapons. These are no longer a thing that you go and you craft one at a time. All thrown weapons have two different variants. They are essentially going to function the same way as every other ranged item in the game. They're no longer either astoundingly expensive or astoundingly annoying to use, and on top of that, they actually get access to kill moves now. So if you were ever wondering why it was that blowguns had a kill move but thrown weapons didn't, there you go. Now, in case you were curious as to where the connection is between the original PSP remake favoring thrown weapons for these guys and, where the logic comes in that that's their standard weapon, if you look at most of the NPCs through the game, most of the Dragoneers, or the Dragoners, sorry, and Beastmasters that you come across do end up using thrown weapons, and those are usually going to be the most effective ones. And I know I personally was always very annoyed when I would go and see the NPCs using this particular strategy, because it was essentially prohibitively annoying or expensive for the player to use, meaning that, it just felt unsatisfyingly lopsided in many ways. So again, I don't know what they were thinking with that. Thrown weapons had their own ranking system, but they had no kill moves. It's strange why they did it that way, but, who knows? Maybe they're just a late game addition or something like that. But either way, you've got two different variants of thrown weapons available to these guys. You've got your Hobble variant, which will give you 5 range and will essentially have a decent chance to cause a Hobble effect, so reducing move by 1. Additionally, if you want to go for the heavier variants, those are available as well. And this will essentially allow you to get a slow effect, or potentially a binding effect on some of them. Some of them will slow, some will bind. The Bola in particular gives a binding effect. The Pelum up here, for example, gives a slowing effect. Slow is the standard that you end up getting on most of these. Now, as far as their equipment is concerned, you've got access to pretty much all tiers. Well, you've got all of your medium armor, you've got some heavy armor. They're actually a little bit unique in the kinds of things that they can get, in that they can equip heavy equipment on their arms, they can equip heavy equipment on their legs, as well as their head. They're only limited to medium equipment on their torso, meaning that they can actually be pretty surprisingly durable. On top of that, if we go back to those same skills that I was just talking about being frustrating, if we go down here, we have those same Beast and Empowered Dragon abilities. Those have been reduced down to 40 TP. They were previously at 75, which was, again, prohibitively expensive. So now there's a pretty reasonable possibility that you can have them run up to, let's say, roughly 4 or 5 tiles away from the front line. You know, you have them throw out a spear or something like that, just go get some TP built up, use an Empower ability on whatever beast they have nearby. That guy flies in, you know, does some chaos. Actually, one particular formation that I found myself particularly liking is having multiple beasts that are able to equip throwing rocks. Basically, the rock throwing ability is now a weapon that they can equip. This way the AI was able to use it as well. And if you have multiple of those, you can essentially have 2 Beastmasters and, let's say, 2 Dragons using this particular strategy. You would have these guys, you know, throwing spears up in the front, you know, going and empowering their dragons and all that. You equip the dragons with a Ring of Alacrity. This will give them an accuracy bonus, and then essentially you can just have these guys going and just basically being a, you know, long-range chainsaw, more or less, just mowing stuff down left and right. It's pretty amazingly good. On top of that, you've still got your same Subdue and Tame, as you would expect, and they've actually got 2 extra abilities now that they've come to this version as well. So we've got Feral Remedy. This restores half health to any particular unit. Again, bear in mind that this is an action ability, so this can be taken along with their main turn. And you've also got Catnip here, which essentially gives a haste to that particular unit, essentially allowing them to run much faster. And alright, equipment-wise, if we take a quick peek at these guys here, like I said, they have a pretty wide range of things available to them. If we go ahead and go over here, they've got fists, they've got axes, they've got spears, hammers, whips, sidearms, and bows. So, one-handed bows plus a shield, very effective if you want to go for a sort of a safe approach. Gives them a little bit more range. Sidearms give them a little bit more power. These are going to be your throwing spears, your blow darts, that kind of thing. So you're going to have a few more options available in terms of power and in terms of debuffs if you're going for sidearms. Whips are actually a lot more useful than they used to be, given that they can attack diagonally and can actually skip over obstacles now, which honestly should have been their bonus from the very beginning, because why would you want a spear but worse? It was a strange choice. Anyway, point being, they can attack diagonally, they can also skip over opponents, meaning that if they essentially get double attacked by a spear, they're able to counter that spear without going and hitting their friend as well. They've got hammers, just the one-handed variants, so it just gives them a little bit of extra armor-piercing punch. Spears, which you can go light shield or, you know, light shield, light spear. Two-handed spears are actually very useful for them, since again they're typically just behind the front line, so usually a heavy spear will give them the option. For example, if you give them something like a pike, they'll be able to go and get a long-range poke with that, and go and get some sports going for their beast units. Axes, good for some extra damage and for that slowdown debuff that you get on the first kill move. Fists, very useful for spreading around poison, especially if you're going to have them standing and, let's say you go for an evasion tank kind of thing. Like right here, this is what I'd recommend for fists. You basically just have the fist, you've got a light shield, you've got a medium vest here, you've got some heavy armor on the legs, and you've got a seal of evasion. This brings their avoidance to around 256, again just under the sword master here. This is basically a stacked evasion bonus from the fist, light shield, vest, leggings, and the seal of evasion. So they can get it reasonably high, not as high as some of the classes, but still, you know, can be quite up there. For a whip build, I personally like going for helmet and greaves on this kind of thing. It just basically gives them a higher version of the health bonus, as well as some pretty decent defense. Usually a seal of vigor on there as well, since they usually won't be doing amazing damage with the whip, but it's nice to have it there. For a thrown weapon build, I would recommend either the heavy armored gloves or crit gloves. Now, crit gloves will obviously give you a few more options in terms of damage. The heavily armored gloves will give you just more overall damage and will give a little bit of extra defense. So if you want them to be a bit more survivable, go for the heavy gloves. If you feel that they're surviving pretty well, you can go ahead and go for the crit gloves. If you're wondering what I'm talking about there, that would be stuff like the nomad gloves here, where you get like 16 to luck and you get a bit of dex. If you go down to the heavy gloves here, they'll end up, well, if we go down to worm scale, way down here somewhere, then essentially that will be giving them strength as well as health and defense. So overall, I personally think this is a little bit of a better way to go about it. On top of that, you can go evasive shield or you can go for a spiked shield. Personally, I like having them with a spiked shield since their defense is still going to be on the relatively lower end. So, they can get a little bit of extra damage going out there without really doing anything. If you are going for a sidearm build, though, I would recommend a Seal of Alacrity, just due to the fact that sidearms in general are not the most accurate weapons in the world, so that's just something to bear in mind. On top of that, we have another build over here. We have a heavy spear build. This is that pike type of build I was talking about, where he can essentially get 2 to 3 tile range. Personally, I like going for a helmet, vest, and void ring on these kinds of guys. So void ring becomes craftable around the point where you get most of your options opening up around chapter 3. Or I apologize, around chapter 4 once you start getting all the elemental craftables and all that sort of thing going on. So once you start going to the elemental temples, you can get the void ring. So basically, worm scale here, or a just basic helmet for the sake of more vigor, vitality, and health. Basically, anything that gives you vitality will automatically make you a lot more survivable. Going for a vest here will give some pretty decent defense. Not as much defense as the heavy leggings, but this will give a little bit of avoidance, which stacks well with the extra avoidance from the spear, which, again, it's got long range, so you're not really worrying about counters that much. I like having the void ring on him just to basically counteract the weight of the spear, since some of the heavy spears do get a little bit up there in weight. But, alright. So we can just go ahead and show off some of the things these guys can do. Now, this is going to be just showing off some movements that the Griffins can do. Normally, like I said, I would personally say the Griffins do a little bit of a better job in terms of hit and run type attacks. With them, usually the better option is to just wait until the front lines have been established. Then you just basically send them in, let them get a hit, and then let them fly back. Especially if you have something like a Void Ring on a Griffin, they can easily go and fly around double turning things pretty effectively. Now right here, I just left a couple of them without alacrity rings just to show you. Most of the beast units will end up having pretty low accuracy, so having a ring of alacrity is a smart choice on pretty much anything revolving around beasts and beastmasters. So that's just something to bear in mind for when it can come up. And yeah, on top of that, I mean, they're going to be a pretty fantastic support class overall. Thankfully, due to the changes that One Vision made, they no longer need extreme survivability to even make it in the front lines. They do, I mean, obviously they do. They've got a fair bit of bulk to them if you build them right. Access to heavy armor means that they can basically take a hell of a lot of punishment, and yeah, they can still dish out quite a bit of damage. If you end up going for heavy spears, like I was saying, you can get a pretty hefty. That's probably the most damage you can get out of these guys, aside from scaling up kill moves on axes and hammers. But yeah, by and large, I would definitely recommend spears and sidearms for these guys, unless you like going for those previously mentioned evasion builds. All right. So unfortunately, that 25% accuracy is a little bit of a killer here. I was actually hoping that this wasn't a rain map, but such is life, sometimes the game just decides that that's the way it has to go. So the downside to sidearms, as you can probably tell, you're very unlikely to get away with attacks from the front, like she probably won't here. Yeah, there we go. And that's really the main issue with these guys. Even when they're empowered and everything else, accuracy is going to always be a little bit of a limiting factor in terms of what they can do. Bear in mind that you can actually boost a lot of their moves. I don't believe Bloodbath is one of the ones that can, but yeah, a lot of their moves can be boosted up pretty significantly. And I mean, I think that about covers that there. When it comes to Griffins and things like that, normally they're going to be able to chew up most things in give or take, 3 to 4 bites. It's like right here, a pretty basic archer is going to take, looks like she's going to end up taking about 3 to 4. You end up getting a bit more down the line here. Personally, the way I like doing this, like I said before, is basically just having, let's say, probably 2 Beastmasters and then 2 to 3 actual beasts for them to function with. So we can go ahead and go for Feral Remedy here. All of their skills, by the way, will allow them... will essentially allow them a fair bit of leeway in terms of what they can do here. Now, if we go down here... Oh yeah, as far as their range, by the way, the Empower moves actually rank up. So they will essentially... they'll get more and more range as time goes on. So if you feel like grinding that out, that is absolutely an option for you. So these guys are going to go up here. Could have gone for a bit of a diagonal attack on that one. But you saw, the whips are able to attack diagonally now. Incidentally, if you're actually interested in whips, they are surprisingly effective on warlocks, of all things. I actually didn't even realize until recently that the warlocks had access to whips. But personally, I would say that they're probably my favorites on warlocks and warriors, and yeah, probably spears and sidearms are my favorite for these guys. Again, this is just mostly a matter of personal preference. If you have Beastmasters running around using whips, it's actually a very effective weapon for them, especially if you boost up their accuracy enough to the point where it can be, a lot more effective. The reason that I say this is because, like I said, accuracy is always going to be a thing for them, but one of the things that whips have unique to them in One Vision is the fact that they're able to attack at a diagonal, meaning that absolutely nothing actually can counter them. I believe even a pistol, despite the fact that it would technically have the range to counter, would not actually be able to do anything in that particular instance. So that's just something to bear in mind. So, alright, let's have you probably just go for a Talon Dive here. Oh, and unfortunately he's a little bit stunned at the moment and didn't feel like doing anything. That's alright. It's no big deal here. So finally, now that we're a few turns in here, these guys will be able to use those Empower moves, and actually probably should be able to mop this up with relatively little effort from there. Now, like I said, one of the reasons that you'll probably end up wanting to use Griffins in a lot of these cases is because they're actually able to keep themselves running pretty effectively. If you have them running up and doing, say, attacks like Bloodbath, they can essentially keep their own health up, where they can just run back, get a little bit of extra healing from their respective handlers, and essentially that allows them to just get right back into the fight. So it's pretty nice way of doing things overall. Like I said, it's a combination that can be very effective, especially if you're running into maps that need a lot of help from flying units. For example, one thing that's potentially a little bit underutilized is Hawkmen as Beastmasters, seeing as they're able to essentially fly in, say, with a team of Griffins, or say you're later on in the game and you've got dragons. Dragons get access to an ability called Dragonfly now, which essentially allows them to fly for one turn. Now, with both of those combined, they can essentially just fly straight across the castle wall and essentially completely wreck face on the other side. Now, who do we want to boost here? You gonna be running next? No, looks like Mr. Askelbos over here is gonna be running next. So we're gonna have you run over here. We're gonna have you go ahead and do a little bit of an empower on them. Bear in mind, obviously, your version will definitely be running a little bit better than this particular emulated version. This is a little bit of a quirk that I have yet to understand. But such is life in the world of emulation now, isn't it? Alright, so skill rank up over there. This guy's going to go for a little bit of a heal, unfortunately. Not a whole lot that can be done about that, but oh well. And alright. So I think we've more or less covered just about everything that there is to cover on these guys. I guess my main thing here was to do one last check to see how big of a boost they got from Empower. So right here, they're getting about that same 50% boost here. If we go to their special abilities, they're still going to be doing quite a fair whack here. Let's go ahead and drop that Sprogmos there. And yeah, so that will end up combining in with their Bloodbath, that will combine with Hurricane, that will combine with Sprogmos, so you can potentially, like, say, have 3 Empowered Griffins run in, drop Hurricanes everywhere, and just completely lay waste to the place. So, alright, I think that about covers everything that I wanted to cover on this class. Hopefully this was interesting and or informative, and if you liked it, go ahead and do that whole subscribey thing. Anyhow, have a good day, and take care.